Absolutely no more plants. I said no more plants. I see you. No more plants. This was a thing that actually happened, and it really wasn't me saying we weren't going to ever get any more plants, or that the garden is too full, or we're not always out shopping for plants. But we have a ton of work going on for the last month or two leading up to an open garden in a couple of weeks. And my point at saying multiple times before we took off to Athens, Georgia a week ago, that there would be no more plants, was just at some point you have to say enough is enough and just get the thing polished up, and whatever it is what it is, right? But we did make a trip down to Athens, Georgia, and we came back with plants, of course. And I was the person saying no more plants before we left, and I think I probably picked 6 or 7 out of the 8 plants that'll be in this video. So we're gonna go over a few plants that we got on a trip to Athens, Georgia, and one from the plant symposium that was in Raleigh this past weekend. But Steph laughed at me the entire time we were down in Athens. We went down to Ram and Tom Giberson's beautiful garden in Athens, Georgia, and Ram sent us home with 1 or 2 that you'll see. And then we went over to Picadilly Farms, and there's been videos already from both of those places. And one more video coming from Ram and Tom's garden. But we bought, again, several of these we bought down at Picadilly Farms, and there's a video from that. That garden is like 2 acres. I didn't give a lot of history in that, so you're welcome to look that up on the internet. Go and visit them when you get a chance. Call ahead. Make sure they're open, and they have some really interesting plants that you'll see here in this video. And welcome to HortTube, by the way. I didn't say welcome to HortTube. I normally do. My name is Jim Putnam. We're in Zone 8A in Raleigh, North Carolina, so if that is helpful with where you're seeing us put these plants in the ground. Our garden here is 0.19 acres, pretty small urban lot, and it's packed to the gills, and that's why I said no more plants. Okay, so this is a Chamaecyparis obtusa, and we have a lot of Chamaecyparis obtusa. So we have stringy ones, larger growing ones, gold ones, kind of chartreuse colored obtusas. We could name the garden Chamaecyparis obtusa probably, and it would be, you would recognize why when you got here because of all the different ones, thread-like and otherwise. But this one's a really neat, kind of compact one. It will reach 8 feet in 20 years if we were to let it. But this one is called Templehof, and it's got this really neat, interesting whorled foliage. You can see it's kind of twisted and turning. Really neat, compact habit, just like other green Chamaecyparis obtusas. The new growth on it's going to be kind of a lighter green color when it flushes out in the spring, when it's actively growing. And then it'll get this really dark, rich green color. Zones 4 to 8, and probably like in zone 4, it's going to turn that probably turn a bit of a bronzy color, typically on the southern areas of some of these conifers that turn interesting colors during the winter, or turn colors that people don't want them during the winter in some cases. Typically they'll stay green right through the winter for us. But that's the first plant. This one again was from Picadilly Farms down in Bishops, Georgia. We really have quite a few sedum here in the garden. Pretty good collection of ground covers overall, but a lot of them happen to be sedum. There's one under this, under the penguin pine here that's already bloomed out. It has kind of a, it's a variegated foliage that it's kind of a off-white color. Middle of that leaf is green. A really interesting one. It's already bloomed out. We did not have this one though. This one's called blue spruce, and it's got spruce-like foliage. It's really interesting. It's on the way this is shaped. It actually does look like a conifer, and it'll be different shades of blue. This one has been in this pot, you can tell, for a little while. It's crowded itself a bit. It's a tiny bit off color, but it gets yellow flowers, double yellow flowers. The vast majority of the ones we have are yellow flowering and typically flower in the late spring or early summer. These are hardy in zone like 3 to 9. And so when I say something is, I'll say they're spring flowering, and somebody in zone 4 is definitely going to tell me they're summer flowering, but there's a reason for that. Ours just typically get to going a little earlier and typically are bloomed out and are just whatever they are, green, yellow, blue, whatever, during the summertime. Really interesting foliage. This one will get 6 inches tall, something like that, when I've seen it in gardens, and as wide as you want to let it get, but this one doesn't seem to be in as big a hurry as some of the others. But well-drained soil, typically we're going to say full sun, a little bit of afternoon shade would be fine, but I think you'd want to put a good amount of direct sun on them. Just make sure they're drying out between waterings, and really, really easy ground cover plant. Ram is never going to let you leave that garden down in Athens without taking home a plant, and she gave us a hydrangea macrophylla, but this is a Lacecap variety. We have all the macrophylla we have are mop heads, and mop heads are, you know, have the full round ball of those inflorescences, but most of those flowers that you see in a hydrangea, the really showy part of a hydrangea flower, are sterile florets around the outer edge. Of course, this is a very tiny one because it's a very tiny plant, but that's a sterile flower around the outside. It's basically like the thing that is supposed to draw in the pollinator. But through a lot of hydrangea breeding, we have now fooled the pollinators into thinking that that flower is going to have something for them, and we've made a lot of sterile or virtually sterile hydrangeas, you know, where they're big, full mop heads. And that's the same thing in paniculatas. You know, hydrangea paniculatas that bloom during the summertime have the conical shape. They're all these super, super, super full flowers. We've sacrificed some of the actual flower parts that are good for the pollinators. That's what we sacrificed in doing that. We've done the same thing in mop heads, done the same thing in hydrangea arborescens, our native hydrangeas. We've done it to all of them, you know, in search of the bigger, better, fuller flower, you know, in hydrangeas and the ones that people will grab off the shelves. But there's definitely a place in our gardens for hydrangea macrophylla Lacecaps, hydrangea serrata Lacecaps, hydrangea arborescent Lacecaps, because they have the flower parts in the middle that are actually the pollinators can actually get to easily and actually take advantage of. These are the same as the other mop head hydrangeas, where they're going to be, you know, the hydrangea macrophyllas or serratas that tend to be pH soil dependent, also a little aluminum dependent as well. So there's kind of a little soil chemistry going on that determines whether or not they're pink or blue or almost purple, and then sometimes white as well. There are white versions. I don't know the name of this variety, but that's not important. A lot of times it's super important to me. I want to know exactly what it is. I want to be able to know. I want to learn all about it. But in this case, I know that this is a hydrangea macrophylla Lacecap that we got from Ram Giberson, right? What else would I need to know about it? That's the perfect, that makes it the perfect plant for a garden full of plants with stories. We got another goldenrod or solidago while we were at Picadilly Farms as well. This one is called Solar Cascade, and the species on this one is shortii, so it's Solidago shortii, which is on the endangered species list. Actually, there are a ton of species of goldenrod. I always thought it would be really neat to go to Canada sometime in the late summer and follow them, the different ones blooming all the way down to Mexico. I think it would be the nerdiest thing anybody ever did. But there are, again, solidagos that bloom, you know, throughout all of North America, you know, that just, they start up in the north and go to the south and just kind of follow the fall pollinators. You know, a lot of these yellow flowering things in Asteraceae bloom in the fall, and there's a ton of them. This one's always easy to identify. You know, the goldenrods are easy to identify, you know, out in the field, standing up, mostly big and tall out in the fields, but a lot of these yellow composite flowering things are just a nightmare to identify during the fall. There's so many of them. We have another variety, another species here, Raguso. This is fireworks. This one's become super popular in so many gardens. They're all blooming a little bit early this year. A lot of things are off this year. But again, we bringing back a plant from that visit and from shooting that video, you know, the other day, bringing this solidago back. But then I'm sitting here next to this incredible, absolutely incredible daylily we have called Autumn Minaret. And we were down at Historic Columbia making friends over a year ago down at Historic Columbia, and they sent us home with this plant. And then we had a plant symposium in Raleigh last week, and they were here and they got to come to the garden for the first time. So those were friends we made down there that gave us this plant. We've got it in the ground here, and they were able to see it, you know, about to bloom in our garden. So, you know, again, I love these kinds of plants that are in the garden like this, that we can trace back to a friendship or a trip or something like that. Got a couple of shade plants while we were at Picadilly Farm. We got a Rhodia japonica called Picadilly Pace, and we had shopped for plants. We were staying in our RV on their property. Again, there's a website called Harvest Host, an app called Harvest Host, that you can stay at various farms and other places across the country. And they were on the Harvest Host list. That's how we ended up there. It's a garden I'd heard of in the past. I'd never been there and seen it or shopped there. But this is a plant they named, a variegated sport of Rhodia japonica. There's tons of variegated Rhodia japonicas out there, and like hundreds of named varieties. It's kind of wild. Rhodia are one of our favorite shade plants because they're great for dry shade. And this section we're standing in back here is definitely dry shade. They're also evergreen, and so think of this as an evergreen hosta that a deer don't eat. So that's, you know, that's pretty high on the list. They're not as cold tolerant. You know, hosta are much more cold tolerant because they're smart enough to hide during the winter time. That's probably why they're, you know, quite a bit more cold hardy. Gets an insignificant flower followed by a little spike of red fruit or berries in the fall. That's kind of down in the plant, but they're super interesting when you see them like that. And there's a few stands of them over at the Ralston, where that can actually be quite showy, you know, even beyond the foliage. There's varieties that get pretty tall, you know, aspidistra-like or cast iron plant-like, and then ones that stay super dwarfing. Some of these variegates like this, you'll see some changes in the variegation over time, not necessarily always completely and totally stable the way you bought it, but we were shopped for a few plants, and then that evening after they had gone home and we were, you know, on the farm, I was like, I got to get that plant. So the next morning we waited and went over there and got one because I wanted a plant named after the place, you know, that we were buying plants from. And then we got a Dysperosporus, or evergreen Solomon seal is what these, you know, go by. They'll have these white flowers on the bottom of the stalks. In the asparagus family, lots of things in the asparagus family does this asparagus-like thing that this one is doing. Oh, we didn't have one, and it's almost every garden in this, every shade garden in this neighborhood, and then over at the Ralston, and you go down to Juniper Level Botanic Garden, and there's just tons of these. There's a lot of different species of Dysperopsis. All just interesting characteristics. Some of them stay, you know, right down at the ground basically, and then some of them get quite a bit taller. Again, little white flowers, not as cold hardy as Solomon seal. I think these are hardy in like zone 6 to 9. They're native to like stream banks in China and kind of riparian areas where they can get their feet down in the water a little bit or get their feet down in moist conditions. But here, when we see them growing in the area, they seem to be incredibly tolerant of dry shade as well. And we see a lot of people using these. I don't say a lot of people, but several people in the neighborhood using them in what we call the hell strip between the sidewalk and the street, that little really tough area if it's shady. And then over at the Ralston in pretty shade, heavy root situations that I know they're not getting. Definitely not getting moist shade conditions over there. They're getting a little bit of tough love and doing fine. So that's what I'm going to do with it here. I tried to bid on several plants in the rare plant auction, but as it sometimes goes in one of those rare plant auctions that Juniper Level Botanic Garden and the Ralston put on occasionally, people will outbid you at the very last second. But they did have a going away gift for everyone. You got to choose from 4 different plants. And I got this gazania. So we saw the Goldenrod out there. That's an aster from native to North America, like in Kentucky, the area in Kentucky, and now we have an aster. This is an aster from South Africa. Small clumping, interesting foliage, kind of blue on the back side, dark green on the top. It'll just become a small clump, yellow flowers. That's one about to open on it right now, but I just thought it was interesting. We have an aster from South Africa and an aster from North America in this video. One other really cool place to go in Athens, Georgia is the State Botanic Garden in Athens, Georgia. Really beautiful botanic garden. So really a great collection of plants. I would say it definitely leans more toward native plants. We took some video content while we were there, and I thought that we would do some sort of tour of some things that are looking good in this garden in the next few days and include that video, a little bit of that video content from the State Botanic Garden there. Really great place, but they have a cart out front, and of course, being that this was, we're not bringing any plants home, no more plants, we, of course, picked out a plant. I picked out a plant. This is a rattlesnake master, Eurygium yuccifolium. Gets pretty tall. Normally see it out in kind of prairie gardens. Buddy Lee has a kind of an area he burnt down in South Louisiana and has a lot of rattlesnake master in it. That is, stands pretty tall out in his garden. I would say 4 feet, every season, something like that. Really interesting flowers. I think there's a reason to do a video, and another plant we were shooting some of the video of at the State Botanic Garden was a lot of mountain mint. They have a huge mountain mint collection. And mountain mint can be a little tough to garden with because most of them are pretty much wannabe bullies in the garden. But what's interesting about mountain mint and what's interesting about this rattlesnake master is the flowers aren't particularly showy to us as humans. But some of these flowers that aren't particularly showy to us are just magnets, absolute magnets to our native pollinators. And this is one of them. The flowers are in like a little, really kind of tight, compact umbel that sit up big and tall on the top of the plant. And it's in that carrot family, the Apiaceae, and all the carrot family members, you can see the flowers are like in an umbel. Sometimes if it's like a carrot, or others, it's in a really loose umbel where the flowers are in kind of a circle, just kind of held together in the middle. This one's a really, really tight umbel sitting up on top of it. May help you recognize things in that carrot family. Yuccifolium comes from the little spines that are on the edge of the leaves. Great plant, great pollinator plant, great native plant that we're missing in this garden. And another good candidate to go along that outside fence over there where we were showing off the Solidago earlier in the video. And then I said in the video at Picadilly Farm that we were going to tote one of these magnolia macrophylla's home, and it'll probably be the first plant that we plant down in the garden in Wallace, North Carolina. That's probably where it'll end up being. These are native to the southeast United States, down into Mexico, hardy all the way up to zone 5 though, so lots of different places. There's all kinds of historical things about the first time this plant was seen is like in the Charlotte area of North Carolina. Others say down in Mobile, Alabama. Fairly rare actually out in the world, but humans have made it far less rare because it's pretty daggone special. This leaf is small. My hand is right here, this leaf is probably 4 of my hands, and that's small compared to what it will be in the future. These can be semi-evergreen in warmer areas, but the leaves get gigantic, another double or triple the length of this. And of course, big leaves come with big flowers. The flowers can be a foot across or more, ultimately. They tend to be high on the tree, so you're not always, once the tree gets a certain size, going to be able to see the flowers all that well. And then it gets a red cone with the red seed inside the cone. And you can really see on magnolias how they were amongst the original flowering plants, because the seed is still in a cone, similar to a conifer. So it's kind of the intermediate between the other types of seed we see in flowering plants and the original flowering plants, which make them kind of interesting as well. Largest leaf plant in North America. Brought back the bigleaf magnolia from Picadilly and all of these other great plants. Typically you'll see these growing in the understory. They can get pretty big in an understory space. I imagine the further north you get, the more sun tolerant they're going to be. But here in the south, when we see them in the wild and when we see them in people's gardens, they typically are in the understory, and you get to look up through the bottom of this kind of little bit of a blue-green coloration to the bottom of the leaf that you can see. And if it's at sunrise or sunset, you get these really interesting shadows cast by these giant leaves. So there's some of the things, or all of the things actually, that we brought back from our trip to the Giberson Garden, the State Botanic Garden, Picadilly Farms, Farm and Garden, and what was the this weekend at the Plant Symposium here in Raleigh after I said no more plants. Thanks for watching.